In 1975, Steven Spielberg released Jaws, which became the highest-grossing film ever made at the time of its release. And just 2 years later, he released another film called Close Encounters of the Third Kind, the very same year his close friend George Lucas released the original Star Wars, which of course then became the highest-grossing film of its time. But in the aftermath of these massive successes, Universal rushed out Jaws 2, a sequel that ignored Spielberg's vision for a follow-up to his first movie being focused on Quint's survival from the sharks that killed the crew of the SS Indianapolis. And after being worried about how a sequel to Close Encounters might go down, Spielberg teamed up with veteran special effects artist Rick Baker to begin work on his own sequel, which ultimately turned into something straight out of a nightmare. Night Skies is an unmade alien movie that was abandoned during Steven Spielberg's work on Raiders of the Lost Ark. The film was supposed to be a darker follow-up to Close Encounters of the Third Kind, but quickly veered away from being a direct sequel. More than likely because Spielberg wanted to both preserve his reputation and just satisfy the people at Columbia with a new Alien movie to bank off of the first film's success. The story was supposed to center around a small group of aliens landing in a rural setting. The group of extraterrestrials were scientists that attempted to communicate with local farm animals before looking towards the human family that lived nearby. The aliens would begin to dissect the animals and terrify the humans in what could have been a very interesting story. Spielberg even paid to reserve cargo space for the NASA space shuttle flight in 1980 in order to get footage of the Earth and Moon in orbit for Night Skies' opening. Now, eventually Steven Spielberg turned his attention to Raiders of the Lost Ark, which he was making with his friend George Lucas, who was also deep into developing his own sequel, The Empire Strikes Back, around the same time. Enter John Sayles, the writer of Piranha, which was a funny Jaws knockoff Spielberg really enjoyed. This guy would get hired to write the movie's script. Spielberg would then go on to look for a director for the film, and eventually Tobe Hooper was the main focus for the Night Skies job, but he really didn't think it appealed well to his own interests, and instead wanted to do a haunted house style movie. Ron Cobb, who had worked on both Star Wars and Alien, would end up getting signed to Night Skies. John Landis wound up giving Spielberg advice to hire Rick Baker to do the special effects. He had just finished making An American Werewolf in London, and the special effects of that film are still widely praised to this very day. So Spielberg paid Baker $70,000 as a sort of down payment for the $3 million Rick Baker needed to finish the special effects. After that, Spielberg went on to make the first Indiana Jones movie, and Rick Baker started mailing videotapes of how far along the aliens were coming for Night Skies. Rick got a call from Kathleen Kennedy back in the day that described Spielberg being blown away by his work, saying it makes Yoda look like a toy and that it's going to be incredible. Some of the details in the story to Night Skies also sound extremely original for this kind of project. The script opened up with an alien named Scar who had killed some of the local farm animals by simply touching them with a very long, bony finger. It even had a creepy light at the end of it, which might sound a little familiar. The film was supposed to end with a good guy alien that was left behind by his evil friends when they leave Earth. And that alien was apparently supposed to cower in fear under the shadow of a hawk, leaving the film on a pretty unsettling note. Eventually, the story started to evolve, with one of the aliens becoming this good guy named Buddy, who actually befriended an autistic boy in the film. Steven Spielberg also started to back away from some of the more darker themes around this point in the timeline. Anytime Spielberg has committed to a sequel, his ideas are always very much so darker than the original film. While Night Skies was never really made, movies like The Lost World, Jurassic Park, and Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom are prime examples of how this kind of headspace the filmmaker gets in for follow-ups drastically changes the tone. And even his version of Jaws 2 was supposed to focus on Quint's survival against the massive waves of sharks that tore through the crew of the Indianapolis. So yeah, it was a very different kind of project. Spielberg had a meeting with a screenwriter that happened to be Harrison Ford's girlfriend back in the day, Melissa Matheson, and she was told the story of Night Skies' good guy alien, and look, apparently it made her cry. Spielberg then felt this was the heart of the story because it was so good, and since he already abandoned the idea of this being Close Encounters 2, he wanted to go all in. So he called up Rick Baker and told him they weren't making Night Skies anymore and that he wanted to make a movie focused on just the good guy alien. And I'm sure you can all guess what that turned into. Unfortunately, this made Rick Baker furious, and both he and Steven Spielberg had a big blow up over the incident. There's a lot to say about that whole fallout, but in order to save time, I'll just say it wasn't pretty. And to make matters worse, Columbia started to get upset that they'd spent so much money on what they deemed would end up being a wimpy Walt Disney film with no teeth. Tobe Hooper was still in contact with Steven though, and they both went on to take some of the stuff that was left over from Night Skies and turn it into a ghost movie, which you've more than likely also heard about. A little bit later in 1984, Gremlins also had a member of the Mogwai be a good guy friend, with the bad guy leader being named Stripe. And the story is a little more silly, but you can definitely see how he was still mining from Night Sky's script in order to make all of these other projects, even as far into the future as the 2000s. Spielberg had not only made another Alien movie with his remake of War of the Worlds using some really scary designs, but he even worked more with John Sayles, the screenwriter in question for Night Skies, in writing Jurassic Park 4, the unmade version with those crazy human-dinosaur hybrids we never got to see. So ultimately, guys, the aliens Rick Baker designed for Night Skies were retooled into the friendly good guy alien we all know as E.T. back in 1982, which wound up beating his buddy George Lucas' 1977 record of Star Wars. And look, E.T. stayed the highest grossing film until Spielberg beat his own record again in 1993 with Jurassic Park. Gotta say, it's kind of crazy to just see film history kind of explode into reality with all of this trivia. But look, guys, that's not the end of the story, because Spielberg's dark sequel tendencies came back for the unmade sequel to E.T. E.T. 2, Nocturnal Fears, was a planned film that would have had E.T. go up against the evil aliens in a story that we never got to see, but maybe that whole project should be the subject of a totally different video. In the end, I wanted to make this video to kind of show you guys how these movies got made and sort of explain how small ideas can explode into a multitude of different projects. Gremlins, Poltergeist, and E.T. all owe their existence and success to this abandoned project, and the fact that Night Skies shares the list of unmade stories he was a part of, like the Quint version of Jaws 2, E.T. 2, and even Jurassic Park 4, well, this makes this thing a really wild piece of movie trivia. The beginning of wisdom is this: get wisdom, and whatever you get insight. Now, I do think it was really unfortunate that Rick Baker was unable to finish the work he'd already started back in the 80s, but I am grateful that these special effects designs have come out since then. And who knows, maybe someday we could get Rick Baker working on Nocturnal Fears, even if it's just produced by Steven Spielberg. Which, you can say what you want, but I think that would be a really smart move to make money at the box office in this whole nostalgia age. I mean, Dark E.T. 2, that kind of sounds like it would make a lot of money, but hey, whatever your own thoughts and opinions on all of this information happen to be, I'd love to hear all about them in the comments down below. Let me tell you something, brother. Thanks for taking the time to watch this video. I really appreciate it, and if you'd like to see more, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell notification so you can be updated when I put out new videos. God bless you all. Christ is King. I hope you all enjoyed your time, and as always, take it easy.